All right. We're going to get started tonight. Thank you so much for coming. I imagine there will be others trickling in, but I want to get going here. So thanks again for being here. This is one of our formats for Deep Dive. As you know, we are going through Scripture in a year, really looking at the whole story that the Bible presents us with and how we find ourselves in that story and what we can know about God and His plan to redeem all things. And so a couple of things, we've been doing some deep dives right after church on Sundays, kind of smaller versions of that. We also have a few on the podcast, and we're going to continue to do those things. We're also interacting on those chalkboards out in the cafe, and so plan to address some of the questions that are being asked there in the form of a podcast. We're also doing some of these evenings where we try to bring in some different experts to talk more deeply about these things. So I'm excited to talk about numbers tonight. Before we introduce, I am excited about it. You guys, I'm hoping that you all are on track and have read Numbers right now, and like me, you have a gazillion questions because there's just lots of stuff going on in there. Let me pray for us, and then I'll introduce our speaker here this evening. So, Heavenly Father, we're just so thankful for the privilege, the opportunity, and the chance to get together like this and to be with one another. And Lord, to learn together. We thank you for the gift that you've given us of scholars and teachers and people, Lord, who are willing to engage the tough stuff of your word and help us in this day and age understand a little more what was going on in these ancient times and what you're doing, Lord, in your plan to redeem all things. So, Lord, I pray that we wouldn't just walk away from this with a deeper knowledge or understanding of your word, but that we would really truly be shaped and transformed by your word, and that we would find ourselves within the story, really asking, how does this come to bear upon us and our lives here and now? Thank you for Dave and his willingness to be here this evening, and we just ask that you guide us in this time together. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. I met Dave Beldman several years ago. Some of you might know I got my master's degree through a seminary called Missional Training Center. And when I first met him, he was a professor, led us through Judges, but has since moved his family down from Canada and are living here now. He is the Old Testament professor for MTC and has become a friend of mine too. So it's just super fun to have him here. Really grateful that he agreed to come and do this. And he claims that he has a fun way to look at numbers. So he's just gonna make numbers jump off the pages for us. And I'm sure I'm setting the stage here for hopefully something that's realistic. But Dave, would you come on up here? And by the way, the reason we're doing microphones and stuff like that is we are recording this because we had several people who are serving over and kids in Awana wanting to be able to see this as well. So, Dave, thanks man. Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
All right.
It's always kind of cool to have some of my students who are already pastors to invite me to speak to their people. So I see that as like a great privilege, actually. Like you trust me with your flock. Now, you may have to correct all sorts of things I say tonight, but, I take it as a privilege. I feel like I'm kind of part of family here. So Jason asked me to do 2 of these evenings. So I feel like I should probably take a census tonight to see how many people are here, and then take another census when I come and do Judges to see how many people are back and how many died in the wilderness and all that kind of thing. So, yes, well, that's Judges, yep, but they're doing that as well in the wilderness. So, it's great to talk about numbers. Now, Jason didn't tell me that you are all doing this reading plan and you're all supposed to have read Numbers. So I might have prepared differently if I knew you had read all these and are having all these what is going on here? I have a question about this passage and this passage and this passage. We'll still do that. We'll have some time where you can ask those questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if I don't know, I'll just say I don't know. But what I want to do is give, and what I love to do as an Old Testament teacher and professor, is to help people understand these Old Testament books, these Old Testament writings, because I think most people, like most people in a church like this, they want to love the Old Testament, right? They want to love the book of Judges, but we as a church haven't always given them the greatest tools and examples of how to do that well. Because, it's one thing to confess that the Bible is the living, breathing Word of God that's important for all those things that Paul said to Timothy: correction, reproof, and encouragement, and so on. So it's one thing to confess that that's true, but it's another thing to know what to do with a book like Numbers, right? So I hope you're somewhat excited. I mean, Judges is not like, if this was Romans, I think we would have packed the house, or if it was the book of Psalms, like people love the Psalms, Isaiah, Matthew's gospel. But we got Numbers, and we can do something with Numbers. And what I like about teaching things like Leviticus or Numbers, the bar is so low that like whatever I give you, you're gonna be like, that was just gold, right? Okay, so if we can advance to the first slide. I had to give this a catchy title, so I've titled this The Lost Traveler's Guide to the Book of Numbers, partly because I think when people get, especially if you're doing this like Bible in a year or whatever, when you get to Numbers, you feel like you're lost, right? Like, what is going on? This book is doing a lot of different things, and I have no idea what it's doing, so it's easy to feel lost. There's a play on the fact that Israel seems lost in the wilderness, and so that's my fun title. But if we could go to the next slide. And click again. All right, so I just want to start off. You'll realize that my style of teaching is to like engage you. So this is going to get really awkward if you don't want to say anything at all, because I was taught when I was a young professor, when you throw out a question, if nobody answers, wait till it gets awkward and then count to 10. So that's what I'm going to do. But it's okay. Silence is okay, right? If you're thinking, I was like a processor. I didn't like to, engage much in classes. So if that's you, don't feel bad. There will be people engaging. But I have these questions up here. What do you know about the book of Numbers? What's your experience with the book? What do you like or dislike about it? Now, you may think, oh, that's not a very good question. We're not supposed to dislike the Bible. Well, that might be true, but I think if we're honest about the things we don't like, maybe I can help you as a guide to say, oh, like, there are better things to dislike about Numbers. That one I can help you like navigate through. But this is the Word of God. I think if we're honest about what we dislike, maybe we can sort out why we don't like it, and help you to get over some of those hurdles. And then I'll give you a bit about my own experience with Numbers. So, what do you got for me?
Can you go back to the questions, Jay?
Yeah, just leave those questions up there. Yeah. Okay, a census. And just define for us what a census is, because it's kind of a fancy word. A counting of the people. So a census is just a counting of the people. If we look, anyone know how many censuses there are in the book? Okay, there are 2. Actually, I'm going to nuance that a little bit, because the first number of chapters, we actually get a number of people being counted. It's not just, and what's being counted is different between the 2 different censuses. So the first one is military-ready men, right? And then the other one is men who are eligible to receive, or people who are eligible to receive land. So that's interesting, the 2 different. And then the Levites are counted, and even within the Levites, like how many are over this age, and the number of male firstborns is counted, because those all have to be redeemed, which is kind of an interesting thing. But anyway, we won't get into all the weeds of that. Okay, we have in the book of Numbers these censuses, one at the beginning and one somewhere in the middle. That's important, and is where we get the name Numbers, actually. We'll talk more about that. Yeah? I have
a high-low.
Okay. Okay.
Fascinating.
Yep.
I dislike the conquest of the Midianites.
Okay.
And then, just the amount of killing that's going on.
Yeah. So Numbers is a bloody book. It's a book full of death. which is not, maybe we don't like that. And actually, we're probably on God's side with that. God doesn't like death. If we learned anything from Leviticus, it's he hates death. Anything associated with death and that we kind of bump up against makes us unclean, right? Or if you're an Israelite. Okay, so highlight is Balaam and that whole story, which is sort of, it usually ends up in kids' storybook Bibles. Not all of Numbers does, but thank goodness.
So I like it because it's a continuation of the story of the early part of the nation of Israel and what they were going through. But then I do struggle with what's the relevancy to me today
Yeah.
with the census that Joni had brought up before.
Yeah.
And some of the details that on the surface, it's God's word.
Yeah.
He said a lot throughout history.
Yeah.
He picked these things to include in the final canon.
Yeah.
What am I missing? What is it there for me for?
Yeah. Good. Good. You all heard that? Yeah.
I'm pretty loud.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. So it's helpful as a chapter in Israel's history, and it fills a gap, right? We're going to talk about where does Numbers fit in that story. That's a really important. If we're going to get to your second question, like what does this mean today? I think at least we have to figure out where are we at in the story. How is this whole episode or series of episodes? How is that fitting in the whole of Israel's story? And that will help us a bit, anyways. Understand how on earth do these things in Numbers speak to us today? What else?
I like a couple things. I taught on it on Sunday, and Tom and I engaged on this a little bit afterwards, but just the story of Balaam and how to view him in the midst of it, because I had always viewed him one way, and then as I was prepping to teach, it just very much kind of turned where it was like, doesn't seem like a prophet, and he's speaking for God, so how do you reconcile those things? So that was a weird one.
Yeah.
Just going throughout the book, this is kind of the low, as Jason said it, but just watching the people continually complain, and
Yeah.
Moses being in the spot where he does not want to be leading, and continually falls on his face before God, and it's like, make this stop.
Yeah, so as pastors, thankfully, we don't have those kind of issues today, right? Like the church today never complains, so I'm glad we've fixed that. Okay. So we got to contend with the fact that we have God's people who he has just done like amazing wonders on behalf of. And there's this like complaining. So we need to understand like the situation a bit, like, yeah, are we that different? How do we make sense of that? But yep, that's good.
When they did the census throughout all the tribes and everything, why did they select the males from 20 years of age and older?
Yeah.
Because accordingly, Jewish males became adults when they were 13, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had their bar mitzvah. I mean, because isn't that what Abraham celebrated with Isaac when he was 13?
Right. So I'm not sure of the answer to the second question about like, is that when you become a male? But what I do know is 20 years of age is the age of military like eligibility. So I don't know if that coincides with becoming a man and how that works with like the rites of passage and that sort of thing. But for the census, it is counting the number of men who can fight. And that's a bit of a forward-looking. Yes, we're leaving Mount Sinai. We're going to leave the wilderness, and we're going to be going to the promised land. But guess what? This isn't going to be a cakewalk, right? So we need to know what is the army looking like? And God knows, right? But part of that is do you know where we're going, right? Like this is we're going into battle. This is a battle we're going into. Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
I thought it was odd about the bronze serpent. Why did
Yeah.
Moses make a bronze
Yeah.
serpent?
Yeah. So Jason said, I said, is there anything you really want me to hit on? He's like, oh, I don't know, like whatever you think is good, but you might want to be prepared for the bronze snake question. So I did prepare for that, but let's leave that for a little later, because I think with some of these things, they're so bizarre that you could look at 5 different commentaries and they're like, oh, it could be this, could be that. Like, I'm not sure we're totally supposed to understand everything, and like some of that, like there's something cultural going on there. And I have some ideas, but yeah, we can talk about that. That is strange. Seems very strange, even like what we know about God and how he works, and like he could do whatever he wants to stop those serpents. So why this? Yeah. Okay, so if I don't answer that, like make sure, I may need a few minutes, but a few minutes before the end. Okay. Anything else like noteworthy on these questions? Anyone done a Bible study on Numbers before, or did your devotions on? Okay, that's all right. Let me tell you a bit about my experience with Numbers. About 2 years ago, 6 months into when everything shut down because of COVID, I was working on the book of Numbers. It was for a writing project, which I'm still working on. But I was doing a deep dive into the book of Numbers. And it was like, I'm writing this book with another person on the Pentateuch, and I drew the short straw and had to write on Numbers. And but then he had to do Deuteronomy, which, again, it's a great book, but it's long and there's a lot of stuff on it. And anyway, so I got Leviticus too, so I don't know. So I had to do this deep dive, and I knew what, like, maybe some of you who've been in the church for a while knew. Like, I didn't study it in seminary or anything like that, just like cursory stuff. So I knew about Balaam, and I knew about the countings of the people. And did you know that the blessing that we sometimes say at church, the Aaronic, not ironic, the Aaronic blessing, the Lord bless you and keep you, cause his face to shine upon you. That's from Numbers. So, it's not all bad. There are gems in there. So I had to do this deep dive, and I'm like, what am I going to do with this? And it's for a kind of book that is really supposed to open up these books of the Bible for today. Right? I'm like, what is this? What does this do? Do you know what scholars refer to the book of Numbers as? Well, one scholar did, and it's been quoted like a gazillion times. It's the junk room of the Pentateuch. Now, why the junk room? Anyone want to take a stab at why the junk room of the Pentateuch? Think of your garage or your spare room. All the stuff that you have, that you value and you think is worth keeping around, but it doesn't have a place. So you chuck it into the storage room, right? The junk room. Now, why Numbers as the junk room? There's a certain logic to it. So why Numbers as the junk room? Sorry?
He said you have to have some place to put it.
Okay. Numbers as the junk room. Anyone want to take a stab at it? Well, when you're reading through it, what was your experience? For those of you who have got through it.
Technically, we have 2 chapters left.
Okay, aside from the last 2 chapters, what's your experience so far? Be really honest, guys. Okay, statistics or facts maybe. Yep. Okay. Yep. Okay, preparation. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay, I'm hearing a lot of stuff. The juices are flowing now. Okay, so it seems disjointed. There's a lot of different things like narrative and law and lists, and I could actually list, victory or battle accounts, and just like in terms, you literary people, like genres, types of literature in Numbers is numerous. So a lot of different kinds of literature. They're kind of disjointed. It's not always super clear on the surface why these sets of laws come after this narrative and, before this whatever battle, right? So it's not always super clear. I want to emphasize that. It's not always clear to us how this stuff fits together. And from our modern perspective, it seems disjointed because it has all these different things. So that's why, and let's be honest, that's how how we experience it, and scholars experience it that way too. So they call it the junk room. So there are these narratives that we don't know what to do with. There are some chronological things, I don't know if you noticed, that are a little bit off. Like, I'm just trying to remember an example. Something about when the tabernacle was erected, and then the Passover. So it's kind of, there's a point where it kind of jumps back a little bit and forward a little bit. So even the chronology is a little out. But there are all these stories. We can't chuck them out. Let's just throw them in the junk room. Numbers. Now, I don't think Numbers is the junk room of the Pentateuch, but it can feel that way sometimes. So anyways, I did this deep dive into Numbers, and I had no idea what was going to emerge out of it. But there was something about being in the midst of COVID. Now, you have to remember, I'm from Canada. The experience here was different, and the experience in the States was different in different places. So I don't want to get into all that, but I thought, my goodness, the church needs Numbers today, especially today. And this idea of wilderness as this in-between place, this barren place where nobody really goes out to the wilderness just for fun, right? Well, we do go hiking out here. I got to say, like, coming from Canada, I had to explain to my students because, like, I'm from Ontario. In northern Ontario, it's like this, we call it the wilderness, right? It's like rocky and like pine trees, and people like put stuff on their backpacks and take canoes, and they can go. And if you know what you're doing, you can live like for months out in the Canadian wilderness. So I have to say, like, look, this isn't the wilderness. And then when I come to teach at MTC, I'm like, the wilderness is not like or the desert. And I'm like, oh yeah, you know what the desert is like. So you get it a little bit, right? Like, well, and you also know. So yeah, you can go hiking out in the wilderness, but you also know that things can go from, yay, this is fun, to, my goodness, this is dangerous, very quickly, within the matter of hours. Right? And that's even when you know what you're doing. So, but that idea of wilderness and COVID-19 as creating a kind of wilderness, and then realizing that this idea of wilderness is in the Christian tradition, and then realizing that the Christian tradition has this wilderness concept because of Jesus going out into the wilderness, and Jesus goes out to the wilderness in some sense to reflect what's happening in Numbers. So there's this whole thing going on. I want to talk more about, my experience with COVID, and even though COVID is it over? I don't know. I think we're maybe beyond the wilderness of COVID, but is this the promised land? Let me just read you something, because this was my experience. These are my words, by the way. That's not what I want. So what I realized when I was doing this deep dive into Numbers during COVID, I was thinking this: what if we as Christians are regarding our pre-COVID-19 normal life in the way that Israel regarded Egypt? Okay? Do you remember, now I'm jogging your memories here, do you remember those like first few months after lockdown, and we're like, okay, I don't want to diminish, like I know some people went through some really hard things, so just I'll speak from my experience because I heard other people. It wasn't, we didn't lose family members in that. So if you did, I'm not trying to diminish that. But some of us were thinking, like you thought it'd be the worst thing not to be able to go out, to go to movies, go out to dinner, and all of a sudden we couldn't do all those things. All the commitments we had in the evenings and on the weekends, they were done, and we were like. Like, we can, it's okay, right? Like, we can live without all that stuff. And it actually kind of is a forced, like, Sabbath in a sense, to slow down, right? And some of us are thinking, my goodness, it'll be good when it's over, but I hope we don't go back to that. I hope we can go beyond the wilderness of COVID into something that we learn something from what this wilderness has experienced, or what we've experienced in this wilderness. So what if we are experiencing normal in the way that Israel experienced Egypt? That was the place of deliverance. And yet when they get in the wilderness long enough, they say, that was good. Why don't we go back there? God liberated them from something there, something like pretty significant, right? That's what they wanted. And yet they wanted to go back there. So what if we were thinking of pre-COVID in that way? What if COVID is God's means to liberate us? Again, like I want to be careful here. What if it's God's means to liberate us from a place of debilitating slavery? Saying, you don't need all that. There's another way. What if God is preparing a home or a promised land of peace and security on the other side of this wilderness? And if these thoughts are anywhere near the mark, the biggest question I had is, how do we navigate this wilderness in such a way that it's a fruitful place of formation? Because that's what, in Numbers, the wilderness should be for Israel, a place of formation. Actually, it is a place of formation, but what kind of formation? Right? God is forming his people. That's what he's always doing. He's forming you and I. But he's forming Israel in the wilderness. And how are they receiving that formation? Okay. That's a little bit about my experience. Could we go to the next slide? Just get all the points up. There we go. Okay, so what I want to do in the time that we have is kind of hit some of these questions. We may kind of like do what Israel did in the wilderness, which is kind of wander around a little bit, but I'm hoping we hit on these all these points here. But okay, so let's very quickly, I can get some of these off the list. What's going on with the name? So Numbers is about the counting of the people that happens in chapter 1 and chapter 26, right? The counting of the people. And so this goes back to the Greek translation, Numbers. Does anyone know what the Hebrew translation or the Hebrew name for Numbers is? Okay, and what is that's very good. We get that Hebrew. So what's the translation of Bamidbar? In the wilderness. I like that name for Numbers. And the reason why I like it is because it's not just geographical, right? It's not just that it's set in the wilderness, but this is the context, like it's the symbolic experience of Israel in the wilderness. So what happens in the wilderness? All right, and it might be a little bit more, snazzy for when you're doing this deep dive, and you could get more people out if it was called In the Wilderness. That's more exciting than Numbers. But so where are we in the story? I want to just briefly go through like step by step. I know you've been doing this in church, and you're sort of following the story, but it's really important to know where we're at when we get to the book of Numbers. So can you tell me actually in Numbers 1 verse 1, geographically, where are we specifically? Sinai. Okay, we're at Sinai. And in fact, we've been camped out at Sinai for a while. In terms of like time, it's about a year. Okay, so Israel has been at the foot of Mount Sinai for a year. In terms of like length of literature in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, we've been at Sinai, all of Leviticus, and from chapter 19 to the end of Exodus, right? So we've been camped out with the Israelites at the foot of Mount Sinai. So all of Leviticus, the heart of the Pentateuch takes place at Sinai, and in Numbers we're about to move, okay? But we've been at Mount Sinai. I want to go back, right? I mean, I won't do this because I know Jason's great at this, but this is the story. If we're thinking about the Pentateuch, it starts in the Garden of Eden, in God's good creation, in the formation of humanity to live with God and in the context of his creation and harmony, and to just flourish there in this place of God's making. And we know that doesn't last, at least in terms of the biblical story, because it's only in chapter 3 where we get introduced to the problem. The problem literally, but also the problem that we're all still dealing with, and that is the fall into sin and human rebellion. Incidentally, the last time we were in a biblical book where there was a talking animal was Genesis 3, And we get introduced to another one in Numbers, and I think it's the last time we get a talking animal. Correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, so, and actually, if you kind of compare what's going on, it's interesting. You know, the serpent is the most crafty, and he's deceiving and ends up destroying everything. And here we have a donkey, right? A donkey. So Balaam is literally being rebuked by his ass. And, you know, the stupidest, most stubborn animal speaking truth and opening. Now, in both cases, you get opening of eyes. That's interesting. But the one, an opening of eyes that leads to death. And in the other, an opening of eyes that leads to life, right? Rescue from, you know, encountering the angel of the Lord. Okay, so, but anyways, that throws everything into chaos. And from Genesis 3:15, it's like God is going to fix this. But we learn really soon on, right? In chapter 4, we get, and Adam knew his wife Eve, and they bore a son. And we think, right? We should, oh, seed of the woman. This is going to fix it. No, right? It doesn't fix it. In fact, it makes it worse. And Cain kills his brother. And we have this like unleashing of sin and its consequences throughout Genesis 4 through 11. And Genesis 12 is when God picks the most unlikely person, old, childless, in the middle of nowhere. And he says, it's through you and your descendants that I'm going to fix all this. And he's on the long road, right? He's playing the long game. Right? And he calls this man and his descendants, and he's forming this man and his descendants to be the people of the promise. And it's through these twists and turns of the story that he's going to make things right again. What I want to just say is that God makes promises to Abraham, and they're like maybe 5 or 6 different promises he makes to them. But I like to boil them down into 3 things, right? So the one is that Abraham's descendants are going to become a great and numerous nation. Yeah? 2, they're going to have a land of their own. Now, we learn soon on in Genesis that that's going to be like 400 years down the road. So, sorry, Abraham, you'll get a son, you'll get some grandkids, and that whole promise of the land, that's going to happen later on, so just put a pause on that. And then the third thing was he's going to establish this relationship of mutual blessing between Abraham and himself, and through Abraham and himself to the nations. So what I like to say, the relationship of mutual blessing, okay? And so I will bless you, I will bless those who bless you, and through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, okay? A relationship of mutual blessing. Now, in the Pentateuch, these 3 promises kind of weave their way through, all the way through. You see them kind of weaving their way through. But they kind of get emphasized in certain books, right? So the whole question of like, how is Abraham, who has a barren wife, going to become the father of a great nation is the preoccupation of Genesis. There are other things going on, but it's always like, but is this the heir? Oh, now Sarah's in the harem of a is she going to get pregnant from? Is that going to happen? Or what about like Hagar? Like that could work. And God says, no, I'm not doing it your way. I'm going to do it my way. So by the end of Genesis, we get 70 souls, right, going down to Egypt because of the famine. It's not exactly a great nation, but when you flip the page over to Exodus, they are a great and numerous nation. And like the language that's used there is like, they're like locusts just like spilling out over the land. And this actually becomes the reason that Pharaoh gets like jumpy. Wow, they're so like these I have to enslave them. I have to do population control. Right? Because if they decide to revolt, there's no stopping them. That's how great they are. So it's like God is saying, check mark, great nation. Now that becomes the catalyst for the next promise being fulfilled. And that's, speeding up, he gets them out of Egypt. So God goes head to head with Pharaoh and all his, the gods in their pantheon there, and defeats them all and claims Israel. Because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Like, Pharaoh's like, who are you that you claim these people? This Yahweh or whoever you are. What have you done? And then God says, sit back. You will watch what I can do. And every god, the sun turns dark. The Nile was a god. It turns to blood. And so on and so forth. To the last plague where he kills the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who would have been the god, right? The next god. So he claims Israel, takes them to himself, gives them a new identity, and then the Sinai covenant, right? So we said we were at Sinai from Exodus 19 all the way into Numbers. That whole time, God is forging that relationship. He says, how are we going to relate to one another? This is how. And essentially, like Jesus summed it up. What does it all mean? Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. Right? That's the beating heart of the Sinai covenant. And then you get the 10 Commandments, right? Which the 2 tablets, like love God, love your neighbor, that's the 2 things. So the 10 Commandments is creating the skeleton with the beating heart, love God and neighbor. And then you get all sorts of detailed laws about what it means to not steal, what it means not to bear false witness, what it means not to covet, and all these other things, not to kill. It doesn't just mean kill. So that's putting flesh on the bones of the 10 Commandments, right? So God is forging that relationship of mutual blessing. If you live in this way, you will be blessed. That's Deuteronomy. You're going to get to that. And if you don't live in this way, there's going to be curses. So that relationship of mutual blessing is forged there at Sinai. And it's finished. And God is dwelling with them, right? At the end of Leviticus, his glory is there, right? Now we're at Numbers. So what are we left with? What are we waiting for? The land, the final promise. That's all we need now is the land. Everything else is coming into place. It's interesting, if you ever noticed, at the end of Joshua, they finished the conquest and they parcel out all the land. There's like 9 chapters of, and this tribe and this clan and this family, they got these lands and these cities and these borders and all that detail, right? And then Joshua's about to die, so he calls all the people. And what does he say? He says, everything has been fulfilled. Not one detail of what God promised has fallen away. All have come to pass. It's like effusive language. It's all been fulfilled, right? Now, live as those people, a blessing. Right? And then he asks, who are you going to serve? We will serve Yahweh. We will serve Yahweh. Right? It's great. That's what we were like. That's where we're moving to. And so Numbers is the start of that final promise. And what we should read, right? If God was writing this and humans weren't the way humans are, it would be like this, right? How does it go? And the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the 2nd month, and so on. Take a census, and they took a census, and so actually the first 10 chapters would be still there. I'll talk about that in a minute. Get prepared, get ready. We're going to move. And then chapter 11, verse 1, and they moved from Sinai and moved into the out. And then we should read, and they were traveling for 3 weeks, and it was great, right? It was hard, right? Because this is the wilderness after all. And the kids got tired, and they complained, and they were hungry, and they were thirsty, and God fed them with his hand, manna, when they asked for it. And they thanked him so much because they loved him and they were committed to him. And they entered the edge of the land. And then Deuteronomy would take up without all the bad parts about what they did in the wilderness, right? So that's what we should read in Numbers, right? That they got prepared, they set out. 3 weeks later, they arrived at the edge of the land and were ready to receive the land. And then Joshua. Okay, let me pause there. Any questions so far? So we're setting the stage of where we're at. You with me? Okay. All right. What's in the book? We talked a little bit about that. There's a lot of different things in the book. I'd say if you had to say what's predominantly in the book, I'd say like narratives and law. Okay, narratives and law, and or even maybe even better, like instruction, which would include all those laws. Okay, and there's a lot of other stuff, but it does feel like a bit of a mixed bag, and sometimes you need some help with some experts to figure out like why are these things chunked together? Why does this happen after that? And there's usually some logic to it, but just on the surface, it doesn't seem to be a logic. Okay, how is it designed? Let's go to the next slide, and you can bring up these next two. Hit it again, and again. There we are. Okay, so there are different ways of thinking about the structure, and we're going to kind of like do big picture stuff, not detailed. You can go to the commentaries and find all the detailed breakdown. But one scholar says, look, the whole book is divided into two parts. And those countings of the people, the censuses, they structure it. So in chapter 1, you have the census of the old rebellious generation. And then in Numbers 26, you have the generation of hope, those who survived, right? That next generation of those who were, 20 years and younger? Was that right? I don't know why I'm blanking on that. Yeah. Okay. But whatever that age is, those were the ones who were going to survive the wilderness. Everyone over that age, they were going to perish in the wilderness. Okay. And he would say, like, if you look at all of those narratives up to, that should be 1 through 25 and 26 through 36. But in any case, all those narratives up to the edge of 26 are all like not great, right? Like in terms of the narratives, like Israel's not behaving the way they should. And then once you get to 26, I think 25 or leading up to 25, you have that incident at Baal Peor, where there are orgies breaking out and like terrible idolatry, and that's when Phineas drives the spear through the couple and all that stuff. So that's like the last, and I think that's also, isn't it, where the snakes come out and they get the snake bites? Anyways, I'm getting a no, but so in any case, this is like the final, the death throes of that generation, right? If finally, the last of them die. And in fact, actually, see, this is where I'm going from memory. I should have an outline in front of me. I think the last of it is Aaron and Miriam dying, right? And that's when we move to the census. And then we see something different in Numbers, something a little bit more optimistic. It doesn't mean all the challenges are done. There's still challenges. There are disputes, actually. But look at the way those disputes are handled in the second half of the book, after 26, and the way that they're handled in the first half of the book. Very different. And actually, not a single person dies from 26 onward. At least not reported. Okay. So that's one way of seeing it. Two different halves, generation of rebellion and death, and the new generation. And so it seems like Numbers is kind of saying, I'm going to maybe take the wind out of my own sails, but later on, I'll have it up on the slide. But I talk of, you know how you have the School of Hard Knocks, right? Anyone graduated? Yeah. You got the School of Hard Knocks. I think what we get in Numbers is the School of Wilderness Waste. And so Israel is getting a first-class education in the School of Wilderness Waste. And it seems like from 26 onward, it was successful. Or at least, they're still rebellious. They're still going to do wrong things. But in terms of the book, it's like, okay, there are signs of hope. Before that, it's not so hopeful, at least in that middle part. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? And then just keep on going down, get this all up here. Okay, all right, so here's another way of thinking or conceiving of the structure of Numbers, and it's taking seriously the movement, right? So Numbers is a book of journeying. and journeying is important. Okay, and you know the old just truth that the quickest way from point A to point B is a straight line, right? And that's not what we get in Numbers. In fact, Numbers we get three basic locations, right? That Israel moves to and from, and that movement there, the second red line there, is the 40 years of wandering, where it's like, I guess they journey to Kadesh, and it's 40 years. They're still on the move. They're moving around, but they're just kind of like wandering in the wilderness. It's not a huge wilderness. Like I said, it'd probably take 3 or 4 weeks to take a caravan through, but they just kind of camp out there and move around and do different things. So really, we've got the movement from Sinai. The first 10 chapters they're in Sinai. They move from Sinai to Kadesh. Then that middle part of the book, which is the dreary part, is in Kadesh. And then they move from Kadesh to the plains of Moab. And on the plains of Moab, we read about Balaam and so on. And then the final census is taken there. And on the plains of Moab is incidentally where Deuteronomy takes place. I always think it's kind of interesting to think of like the, bear with me here, but the narrative tempo, like how fast the narrative is, right? Like you can, in narrative form, you can say, like I could say, oh, I grew up in Ontario, right? And then I moved to Phoenix. Well, that's 44 years of my life that I've narrated in just like a split second, right? I could fill that in a lot longer. In the Pentateuch, right? In Leviticus, we've got however many chapters all happening at the same place over the course of like, a year, right? From staying. And then Numbers, we've got 40 years narrated, more. Probably 42 years, 41, 42 years. And then in Deuteronomy, we have a whole book that's narrated, that's taking place over the course of maybe a few days, right? And it's all there so it's slowing down, right? Deuteronomy is going to slow down. Moses is about to send the people off. He's been with them in the wilderness. He's about to send them over into the promised land. It's like, if any of you have college students and you're sending them off to university, right? Or to college, right? Remember to brush your teeth. Don't forget to be nice, and please and thank yous, and don't forget where you came from, and how he taught you, right? That's Moses sending the people off. These are his final words he can say to them. Anyway, so journeying is a really important part of the book of Numbers. Okay, we're going to keep moving. So that's a basic outline. If you can think of, if you can just keep in the back of your mind that Numbers has these 3 locations: Sinai, Kadesh, Plains of Moab, and everything is kind of circling around those areas. And it's all happening in the wilderness, right? It's all the wilderness. Sinai is in the wilderness. Plains of Moab is on the edge of the wilderness before you cross the river and go into the Fertile Crescent there. Okay. I want to introduce you to a fancy word, okay? Anyone heard of the word liminal before? Okay, a few of you. Anyone want to give a definition of what a liminality or a liminal space is or liminal is? No worries if you're not. If you raise your hand, I'm not going to put you on the spot. Okay, it's transitional. Yeah, anything else? Pardon me? Unsettled. Okay, so it comes from a Latin word, liminus. I don't know. And it just means threshold, right? So at the threshold of your house, right? If you are standing on the threshold of your house, are you inside or outside? You're kind of, I don't know, moving in, not quite out yet, right? You're in between. And a liminal place is an in-between place. It can be any kind of in-between place. Okay? Maybe hit the next thing, okay? So a liminality or a liminal place is an experience of being in the place between where we have been and where we are going. Or we could say, like, in terms of like our own development, who we were or who we are and who we're going to be, right? So it's that in-between place. Now, the reason why I'm giving you this term is not to seem fancy or any of that thing like that, but sometimes I find, and I found with this particular term, it names something, right? Have you ever had it where you're experiencing something and you're just like, I don't know what's happening? If you've ever had like anxiety or like a panic attack for the first time or something, you're like, what is happening to me? I don't know what's happening. And then you go to the doctor and then you realize, hey, this is a thing, right? And there's a name for it. And you're not alone, right? Because it just seems like I'm alone here. I don't know what's happening, and my world is crumbling. But there's a name for it. And the name kind of like, it doesn't make everything okay, but maybe like domesticates it just a little bit, if you can give a name to it. It helps you realize you're not alone. People have gone through this. Maybe people have had victory over it, or whatever. And liminal is not always bad, as we'll see. But let me give you some examples of a liminal place. Or if you can think of any, just feel free to chime in. University or college, right? It's a liminal place. Nobody goes to college to stay there forever, right? There's something wrong if you're never moving on from college, right? So you go there, you leave, like sometimes you leave home, right? My daughter is in her senior year. So she left home, and so that's been interesting as well. When she's come home, it's been a little bit like uneasy, and you've had one, right? So they come back, and it's like, is this my home? Like, how do I relate to the family now? So there's a little bit of like uneasiness there, but you go there knowing that you're leaving some stuff behind, and that you're going to emerge out the other end. And what do you hope happens in the middle? You hope that you learn things and you develop and you grow and you know where you're going. Yeah? That's a liminal place. Now, it's not a literal place, is it? It's an experience. Anyone else come up with ideas? I'll give you a couple more. The ladies in the room who have had children, when you become pregnant, pregnancy is a liminal space, right? You are literally a mother now. Yet you don't get to like hold your child. You don't change diapers. You're not getting up in the middle of the night. Well, maybe. So it's you're a mother, but you're not yet a mother, right? The wedding day is a liminal space. Maybe even like engagement is a liminal space, right? Where, you get all dressed up and the day and, you're getting married, but you're not quite married yet. You're entering into this weird space and you're dressed weirdly and all these people are coming and it's strange, and at the end you're a different thing, right? You're a spouse, okay? So those ones are kind of like more or less voluntary and generally speaking like happy liminal spaces, but just realize like in each of those you're changing from something to another thing. Right, and you're in that in-between place. And sometimes it's hard, when you're pregnant, right? Things are happening to your body, and it's uncomfortable, and you have to kind of like lean into this, and it's uncomfortable, but it's all worth it, right? When you see your child's face for the first time. Then they become teenagers. I love our teenagers, by the way. I'm loving the teenage stage. Okay, so, but some of them, some liminal places and experiences of liminality are not at all voluntary, and they are much more difficult. So, anyone ever lost a job? And maybe in this room there's somebody who is in between jobs. It's difficult, right? Especially if you're not planning for it. I think Mom, my mom's here. I think the first time I saw you cry was when you lost your job. Sorry to put you on the spot there, Mom. And that was hard, right? So you've lost your job. You knew what you were before. You knew what you needed to do when you woke up in the morning, and you knew what you needed to do when you got to work. And now you're in a place where what am I now? Now, for some of you, just you're marketable, and you get a job easy. But maybe you've been around people or you've had the experience where getting that job again is not easy. And you don't know when that's going to come. And the longer it drags on, the more it's like difficult and painful. And you're questioning yourself, and depression sets in, and who am I? Like, what's wrong with me? And all the things, right? It's painful. Again, this might be close to home, so I apologize if this is bringing up stuff. But what's that? Prison is a very liminal space, right? Like you go in, and nobody wants to stay there forever. That's involuntary. Yeah. Now it's interesting the stories of people who are incarcerated, right? Some people like it actually, turns them into lifelong criminals, right? Other people say no, like this is a time where I get right with God. This is a time where I'm going to get educated. And so in each case, there's the word that I want to talk about is formation. There's formation happening in prison, right? Some for good, some for bad. A diagnosis of cancer, that immediately launches you into a liminal space where everything changes, right? The future, your view of the future changes, right? You thought that you had this runway, and even if it's not terminal, like, right, you're thinking, whoa, that runway is not what I thought it was, right? All of a sudden, you're into treatments, you're going to doctors, all things, your routines change. You are in a liminal place, and the longer it drags on, the more anxious you get. This is a liminal space. Okay, we could go on. What we have in the book of Numbers is Israel in a liminal space. Okay? Hit it again and again. Thank you. So I've given you some examples. Pregnancy, college, whatever. They're those liminal spaces. What we've been before and what we're going to be. And so for Israel, the liminal space is between Egypt, where we were, and what we were, slaves. No choice, right? We are just there. Then there's liberation right into the wilderness, right? And it was going to be at least a year and 3 weeks, 4 weeks, right? Because they're there at Sinai. They're going to be in the wilderness at least for that year and another 3 weeks to get to the promised land. So God is going to form them and shape them in the wilderness for at least a year and a bit. Okay? And they're not into the promised land, so that's what they're in between. The wilderness is their liminal space between Egypt and the promised land. With me so far? Yeah? Okay. And what I want to say, let me just see where we're going here. Look where we are. Okay, yeah, let's hit the next slide. Thank you. We'll do these one at a time. All right. So what do we want to say about liminality? And I'll refer to like wilderness liminality. That's the ones that we don't really choose, right? Where we're just stuck. The first thing, and again, I want to be really careful about this, okay? I think this is true, but I don't want you to think that I'm trying to be insensitive or offensive or anything, because some of you are in a liminal space. We all are in some sense, but some of you might be in a really hard liminal space. And just to say very flippantly, God has you exactly where he wants you. It's like, you don't know me. You don't know what I'm going through, and that's true. So I want to be careful when I say this. I still think it's true. But for Israel, God has them exactly where he wants them, right? They want to get out, right? I got to say, like, about the wilderness, right? Like, I talked a bit about, like, we're in Phoenix. We're in a desert. I had to, rethink about, like, what I think about the wilderness. Not just, like, I knew it wasn't like Northern Ontario, but I used to give this definition that the wilderness is as a definition, and I think it's kind of true, but it has to be nuanced. But as a definition, wilderness is a place that does not sustain life. Okay? Wilderness is a place that does not sustain life. When God says, hey, come on out with me to the wilderness, he's saying, come out to a place where things go to die. Seems kind of like Jesus-like, doesn't it? Right? Like, you have to die in order to live. Right? Jesus had to die so we live, and we have to die to ourselves in order to live. But anyways, come on out to the wilderness, to a place where things go to die. And the only way you will live is if I sustain you with my gracious, loving Father hand. So that's where I'm going to lead you. That's where I want you. My little nuance is that, I do see that there is life in the desert, but the life that's out there is so harsh. What are those little, chipmunky things that you have out there? I think you call them, desert rats or something. They're kind of like, I don't know. I think it would be like a chipmunk that was I don't know, lived the roughest life ever, died, came back to life, and then, they are really rough. And scorpions, rattlesnakes, all these things. Even the plant life that grows there wants to kill you, right? It is saying, get away from me. I'm just trying to survive here. Don't get in my space, right? So there is life there, but it's hard won, and it's hard. It is just hard, right? But anyways, it's essentially a place that cannot sustain life. So sometimes God puts us in the wilderness. A place where, all of our human faculties cannot give us life. We have to rely on God. We have to be dependent utterly on his gracious hand. And some of you, I know, maybe are in that moment right now, and God sees you. He knows you're there. And when I say he's got you exactly where, he's not thinking that, yeah, I got you right where. He's saying, I got you right where you are. Right? I got you. I see you. Okay? And he will sustain you. And some of you, I know, will be able to testify that you found God, or you experienced God in a way that you have never experienced before in the wilderness. Okay? But God puts us there, and let's keep going. What we got next? This is the other thing, right? So on the one hand, we confess God puts Israel there. God sometimes puts us there, right? It's a place that he does work on us and meets us. And yet, it is a place of vulnerability. We saw this during COVID, right, as a liminal space. First of all, COVID has us on the ropes, right? Those of you who like boxing. We are on the ropes, and the devil is doing it just relentlessly, hitting you while you're on the ropes, right? Satan loves it, right? If God has us where he wants us in the liminal space sometimes, or in the wilderness, Satan loves it when we're there, right? Because he thinks that's where you're vulnerable. I got you. You see that in Numbers. It's not only Israel is its own worst enemy, right? Complaining, leadership troubles, right? Just outright rebellion. But it's also external. So you got these forces they're almost like vultures, right? Oh yeah, Israel's in the wilderness. Look at they're fighting each other. They're going to be so easy to pick off, right? It's really interesting, the Balaam thing, when I was studying it. It's the whole book, we are on the ground with Israel. And just almost watching this stuff happen. The snakes start slithering out. The point of view is on the ground in the camp. The one time it moves away from the camp, did you get that language? We're up high. I feel like it's kind of like an apocalypse, in the true sense of apocalypse, like an unveiling. Israel's down, complaining about food and all this kind of stuff, leadership. And what they don't know, there are forces planning their demise. And as they're doing this stuff, it's happening up here. And this is the evil one just going here we go. We got them. They are so vulnerable, we'll just be able to pick them off. and the veil gets torn back, and they're like the evil forces. And even like the fact that he's a seer and there's weird mystical stuff going on, this is spiritual warfare getting played out through these political things. So we're vulnerable. I mean, it's just so interesting that during COVID, we have the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, we get a polarizing election and all that kind of stuff, right? It's just like, that's like the 1-2 punch. Okay, let's keep going. Wilderness liminality requires wisdom. So how do we interpret? That's a really interesting thing for Israel. They not only interpret Egypt as a place of security and prosperity, they even get to a point where they say, Moses, God, you took us from a land flowing with milk and honey. Like they use the language of the promised land. Now, just think of that. The place of debilitating, inhumane slavery is being reinterpreted because things are so bad as the place of promised land. And like, we'll kill Moses. We'll appoint new leaders to lead us back there. That's where we want to go, to slavery. Now think about that, guys. As the church, in what ways are we seeing, back there or whatever lifestyle as the place of security and prosperity? God has delivered us from that life, right? So it requires wisdom to, I mean, if you think of COVID or whatever you're going through, like, how do we get God's perspective? How do we get, like, Caleb and Joshua, they get it. They pass with flying colors through that the school of wilderness waste, so that when they see what life is like in the promised land, and there's all these like giant people or whatever, they're like, don't worry about it. We got it. God's on our side. What are you worried about? They have God's perspective. They're able to interpret things properly. But just realize that wilderness has the propensity, or we have a propensity to really badly misinterpret what's happening on the ground now and how things were in the past. So that's something to bear in mind, because and then what it does for us is it creates fear, unbelief. We look to the future not with hope, but with fear and disdain, or despair maybe. Okay, next point. Wilderness liminality demands formative practice. So how do we lean into formation in the wilderness? It's interesting that I talked about how wilderness is like a place of that doesn't sustain life. Like, I can just imagine, and those of you who have kids, like taking your kids out into the wilderness for 3 weeks journey. You're watching them, right? There's no food. Well, there's manna, okay, but they're starting to lose weight, right? Where are we going to get our next water? Their feet are sore, right? Like, that's real, right? That is real suffering. And I don't think God is like, hey, stiff upper lips, guys, right? Like, just bear it. I've got you where I want you. No, I think so. Think about what resources are there. Now, they didn't have the book of Psalms then, but the book of Psalms will eventually be Israel's songbook, prayer book. Did you know that there are more psalms of lament than there are any other kind of psalms in the book of Psalms? More psalms of lament. You know what a lament is, right? Another word for that is complaint. However, there's a difference between what Israel is doing in the wilderness and what the psalmist is doing when he laments in the Psalms, right? And what's the difference? Trusting God. Now, that's not like, oh, okay, yeah, I trust you, God. It's good. Like, don't worry about my kids. No, God, I know you're a good God. I know that you're in control of all this. So why? Why won't you give water? I mean, you control the whole Job and the song. Like, you control the wind and the rain. Just give us some rain. Like, why are you letting us? How long, O Lord? This is the cry of the psalmist. How long? Not from unbelief, But because of belief, because of trusting God, there's a crying out, God, what are you going to do? Because we know this is not your will for us. And whatever you're doing, accomplish it in us and save us. Right? Not my will, but your will be. So there's a difference, right? There are resources there. So how should Israel, what would it have looked like for Israel to lean into, not stoically and just trying to not think about it? That's what I do when things are going bad. I just won't even think about it. I'm like, God will deliver it, but in the meantime, just grin and bear it. No, that's not what he wants. How do we lean into this? I think lament is a big one. There's some other things there. Storytelling and listening. They have the stories, right? They didn't really have necessarily scriptures, but they had the stories. And Moses will tell them in Deuteronomy, tell the stories, sing the songs, do the rituals to remember what God has done so that when you are in the wilderness, you'll be formed in the right way and not deformed. Wilderness liminality can produce, here we go, productive formation or unhealthy deformation. And we see that in that middle section of the book where Israel, is deformed, not formed in the right way because of their unbelief. And we see some hints that, hey, maybe they are being formed in the right way in that second half. And I think this is the whole of Scripture, forming us to be those followers of Christ into the wilderness. Next point. Okay. Just get all the points up there, I think, for now. Thank you. I'll just let you read those. So this is it's a story for our benefit. I think it's all coming out. Israel in the wilderness is a type of us in the wilderness and how God relates to us as we go through wilderness. That can be individually. I think as churches, we go through these times of liminality. I think in some ways the whole church in the whole world, or at least in the West, is going through this post-Christian. What are we gonna? We're a post-Christian culture now. What's coming out the other side? Where does this all lead to? How do we sustain health and growth and formation in the midst of this kind of space? I just want to leave with this. We are in the second week of Lent? I know my background and upbringing, and even the church I'm in right now, we haven't talked at all about Lent, and maybe you don't talk about it here. But Lent is that 40 days before Easter, right? And in the Christian tradition, there's this practice of fasting and praying and giving alms and a sense of following Jesus, who went into the wilderness for 40 days. And look, I think Jesus gives us a picture of what it looks like to walk in the wilderness, to be in that liminal space with unswerving allegiance to his Father. That was real temptation. The things that the devil was offering, were kind of like the easy out, right? Give them wonders, they'll follow you. Give them bread, they'll follow you. What's the other one? But anyways, these are offering save yourself. That's the wonders. Anyway, so I got a fast track to what you want. And what does Jesus do? He's been fasting in the wilderness. He's been praying, quiet with his Father, and he can draw from the Pentateuch, right? In responding to the vulnerability of what he was there in the wilderness. So he provides the way, right? He walks the way of Israel, and because he walked the way of Israel and was victorious, he gives us resources. He empowers us by his Spirit to walk through the wilderness. I've got 10 minutes left, and 3 of those is going to be explaining the serpent. Maybe I can do that in 1 or 2, but I'm going to stop there and allow you to have questions. Let me explain what may be a plausible explanation for the serpent, because it is bizarre. And let's acknowledge it's bizarre. We might not really fully understand what's going on. My supervisor, actually, I went to his commentary, and who supervised my PhD, and he's like the expert. So he said, maybe what's going on is like when you get the ritual laws, what you have is like an animal has to die and atone for somebody who deserves death. So death has to happen in order to avert death. Blood, which would like if you were an Israelite, according to the Levitical laws, if you got blood on you, you are profaned or you become unclean, and you have to go through these. Well, shed blood, which is the source of being profaned or becoming dirty or unclean, is the thing that's going to make you clean. The ashes, this is Numbers, the ashes of a red bull, which again, a dead bull would make you unclean, can, like if it's mixed and taken properly, can make you clean. So in a weird paradoxical way, the things that can make us unclean are the source, or can, atone for death, are the sources of life and purity. So possibly the snake, now it's not, do you notice how it doesn't say, just look at the snake and you won't get bitten? No, these are the people who have been bitten, right? And it's made out of, it might say bronze or brass or whatever. It's almost 100% copper, and they found, not this one, but another similar thing in copper, a serpent made out of copper. And the copper would be red in the sun. And it's talked about having like the swelling and the redness. So what does God instruct? The thing that is causing you this pain and will like cause you death, look to it and it will give you life. And just as I'm saying that, this is why it is totally logical that Jesus says, just as the serpent, the source of death, is lifted up and becomes the source of life, so too he would be lifted up, and the cross, which would be the source of death, would become the source of life. That was pretty good. Not too bad. I don't know if that's true, but it's plausible.
Drop this?
Yeah, drop the mic. This doesn't work with this thing. Yeah.
I'm gonna run around with a microphone just for the sake of the recording. So if you have a question, I'm gonna have you speak into the microphone.
That was Gordon Wenham, by the way, in his Numbers commentary, Tyndale.
Dave, do you have any thoughts on what I mentioned earlier? Just we're heading into the conquest stuff, and just Moses commanding, hey, kill the women, kill the children, and like that's hard for our modern minds to read and to swallow. And do you have any thoughts on that?
I've written some stuff on Judges, and you have to sort of deal with conquest and how to think through those. So I think there are ways of making it more understandable, but I think this idea of conquest and God commanding the slaughter of people, I don't think it's ever supposed to be explanation should never be satisfactory. In a certain sense, I think in the trajectory of the biblical story, we can say God doesn't want people to die, right? Conquest, violence, death, he hates that stuff. He hates it so much, he's willing to give up his son and to make the biggest sacrifice to undo all of that stuff. So there are ways, I don't want to get into all that, but there are ways of understanding it a little bit better, some of this conquest language, but it's just uncomfortable. Yeah. I would say one thing that you should bear in mind, anyone read Con Iggulden's novels? He's done some historical narratives. If you like historical narratives, he's done one on Genghis Khan, four books on Genghis Khan, and it just blew my mind thinking about how could this terrible warrior actually be a human, And this book, like, very humanized, like, but he was good. Like, he was not happy unless he was like conquering lands and conquering people. And he was nomadic, so it was just like move, and he ended up like having this massive, like he would unite the tribes. And the like the Chinese emperor was like deathly afraid. He's like, we'll give you like loads and loads of gold. And he took it, but he's like, what am I going to do with gold? I'm a nomad. What am I going to do with gold? I just got to like lug it around. We'll take your lands, thank you very much. And he goes, so for Genghis Khan, he was not happy unless he was on a horse with a sword in his hand with his men behind him. Israel was never meant to be an ever-conquering people. So the conquest, it's almost like there was like an expiry date on the conquest. Yes, you are going to, there is going to be a piece of land where I am going to set you and plant you, and I am going to like grow you up. And as you keep the terms of the covenant, the nations are going to come in and say, what makes that nation tick? So that you're not going to go out and with the sword and like conquer and make a bigger kingdom. They're going to come to you and say, we want a piece of that. How do we get in on this like wonderfully wise and generous and prosperous nation? What makes you work? Right? So there was always a shelf life. And what you find is after the conquest, any battle that Israel engages in is either defensive or evil, like not ordained by God. So I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't answer your question, but
I don't know. To your point, it's supposed to be unsettling, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the things we've been wrestling as a church is like how does a good and holy God dwell amidst unholy, sinful people and redeem them? And the answer is never easy. It's always going to be an unsettling, complicated answer, I think. Yeah.
And Numbers is it's a costly, like that school of wilderness ways is costly. And the road to the promised land, which was like this, is like there are bones in those sands. Lots of bones. That cost a lot. Yeah.
When you say wilderness waste, what do you mean?
Just
by
like
that?
It just sounds good.
But is it that they wasted what they could have learned in the wilderness?
No, wilderness waste in the sense that like it's a wasteland. It's yeah. I just wanted the alliteration.
I like it.
You mentioned there's probably an answer to why this narrative was next to these laws and the order of every little thing. Could you just give the reference of what might answer the placement of those different stories?
Oh, I mean, it really depends on what we're talking about, right? So,
or like a commentary that speaks to, the overall structure.
Okay. Yeah, there's so many. I'm just trying to think what I was using at the time. I would have a look at, so Gordon Wenham's little Tyndale Old Testament commentary is a nice little introduction. I wonder if Roy Gain has, or maybe I'm thinking about Exodus, if Roy Gain has the new application, NIV application commentary, that's a good one. But there are lots of like literary commentaries. John Sailhamer's the Pentateuch as narrative will probably really like major on those things. Yeah.
Can you say that name one more time?
John Sailhamer. Yeah. S-A-I-L. Hammer.
Joni, I feel like you have a question.
Well, it's been a long time. You guys have been great, really.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Because I got 2 minutes.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
Last 2 minutes. Says you. Says your experience. So they're wandering around through the wilderness. They have their herds with them. So they have the cattle, the sheep, the goats, the rams. But they don't eat them. Why not?
That's a good question. And
I couldn't find an answer.
yeah, and I would want to see like, okay, so my first answer is I don't know. My second answer is if like I had to start to reason like an Israelite. So, there's this psalm where it talks about like the farmer sowing with tears, and you're like, what's going on? Like, why is a farmer crying while he's sowing out tears? sowing out grain. Well, if you think in like a subsistence-based agrarian society, right, the stuff that you harvest off your field is the stuff you're going to be eating that year and also planting, right? Now, there's a tension there when things go bad because you got 10 grains or you get 10 bags of grain there that you know can make like all the bread you want for the next however long, but if you eat it all, you got nothing to plant, and you are in bad situation. And the commentators think that this idea is that like, you know, you got a hungry child, or you got a whole cluster of hungry children in your home, and that stuff that could be bread put on their plate before them, you're throwing onto the ground, and you're just like weeping because you know that this is the answer to like that feeling in your stomach and your kid. And I wonder if there might be a little bit of like, hey, if we get to the promised land and we don't have cattle and whatever, what are we going to do? So there might be like conservation. I wonder like how much they would have. Like how much were they taking out with the plunder, how much livestock they would be taking out. I mean, if you watch the Ten Commandments or Prince of Thieves, like they seem to have a lot of stuff. I'd want to look at the narratives and see like what did that actually look like. But they did do a lot of sacrifices, so yeah.
You said Prince of Thieves.
Sorry, yeah.
I assume you didn't mean Robin Hood.
Robin Hood, of course.
Kevin
yeah.
Costner, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a mashup between
I
like
know.
Joseph and Robin Hood. That'd be a good movie.
That would be. That'd be great. Hey, would you guys just thank Dave for being here?
Thank you.
I think in about 3 weeks or so, you're coming back, March 12th. He has actually done his PhD in the book of Judges. So
I actually know something about Judges, so watch out. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the one we're doing 6 hours straight, like a
That's
marathon?
right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So put that on your calendar. Look ahead to that. That's going to be on a Tuesday night as well. But yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Dave.
And if I could just say to Jason, I feel like I was like maybe a little bit short with you, but like you did a great job, and I was like, next one, but I am very grateful. Yeah, okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.